Right, let's move on to the fullback situation then. Anthony Ralston comes in at right back. It was an interesting move from Ange, but again, it seems to have paid off. Ralston again showing his worth for the club. It just has to be said every time that Ralston plays this well that it is so surprising how well he has come along in this season, and a massive boost to Celtic, like to have this player pushing Juranovic for that position. James, you've been writing for the Celtic Way this week about the fullback situation and the creativity in particular. So, what have you been seeing?
Yeah. So again, this is not to suggest what's going to happen going forward. Most of this is, as we say in analytics, ex post, right? So looking at the history, measuring what's actually happened, and comparing. And I actually wrote when it appeared. Now, some of it may have had to do with injury, but probably also the return of Taylor. Is that when Juranovic supplanted Ralston, kind of early December, as or seemingly supplanted Ralston as a first choice right back, I wrote that it was going to be difficult just from a pure output perspective for him to match what Ralston had done, because what Ralston had done was, like Tierney-esque level of output, just pure, when we talk about measurables, right? So things like chance creation and even his goal threat, his ability on corners and aerial balls, uh, he had done quite well there. So, um, and measurably speaking, Juranovic has not come close. He's about half overall of Ralston's output from a chance creation and an attacking sense. But what I wrote about is that is not necessarily a bad thing. Meaning that the interesting part, and what I documented in the piece, was that the overall team performance level is startlingly similar. Right, it's almost exact. I mean, this goes back to my point I've been making in recent weeks about how much of it is system attributed, i.e., what kind of what Ange is controlling, so to speak, what he's deploying and implementing from a system perspective, and then how much of it's kind of pushed down to the individual player. And the way I tried to kind of suss that out was looking at Abada's performance playing with those two players. And what we see is really just a redistribution during the period, meaning that when Ralston's played, he's taken over kind of more. And Alan, I think I mentioned before we went live about the overlapping. Ralston tends to overlap and get to the byline and create chances, whereas Juranovic is playing kind of more of an inverted, deeper role. So to me, this comes back to having a good manager, right? Which is he's looking at matchups, presumably, and when he's playing players, he's altering tactics and what the team is doing relative to the strengths and weaknesses of each player. So if you just take kind of a simpleton, examination as far as, okay, A versus B, you could make the argument that Ralston's been the better right back. And it's not all positive. I mean, he turns the ball over. He's been dispossessed at higher rates, right? So there's aspects. It's not 100%, right? So I want to qualify that. But what basically the point of my piece was to lay out the good part of all of this is that we have two good options that appear to play in different ways, have strengths and weaknesses, and it empowers the manager to be able to do things like he did, I think, what looked like he did on Sunday, which is to craft the side relative to the style play and the tactics that he wants to implement, versus the opponent. And to me, that's good news all around. So rather than getting bogged down in a, Ralston versus Juranovic, my focus was like celebrating, hey, we've got the tools here, the depth, for Ange to be able to really do what we all want, which is to make the team as competitively advantageous on each in each game.
Mm-hmm. In terms of sheer footballing ability, like just the basics of touch, dribbling, passing ability, I'd argue that Juranovic is probably Celtic's best player. And just in terms of just being a footballer in the very basic sense of it, I think Juranovic has all the best attributes, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's the best right back in the team. If Juranovic's output going forward is lesser or less effective than Ralston's, is it too simple to put forward an argument then that the system of Ralston overlapping more than Juranovic is a more effective way for Celtic to play? Is that too simple an argument to put forward?
Yeah, that's why I benchmarked it looking at the team level performance. So the team performance levels have been remarkably consistent in both periods with both players playing. That's why I said it's really a redistribution of some of that creative output between the right back position and the winger position. So again, I see that as kind of two sides of the same coin. I mean, it's more so how do you want to create it? Do you know?
Okay.
And yeah, so this is why I say it's a positive. I think because you have the ability to not have general creative output go down playing either player. It creates that flexibility from a tactical perspective in order to try and still kind of tailor or customize what you want to do relative to the opponent. And I know that's kind of counter narrative that, as Ange says, we like to play our football, or as he says it, and impose, but there's shades of gray in these types of things, and tweaking. And I think that's basically what's happened. So I think that's really positive.
Alan, I know you've been thinking about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I again, just coming back to the Livingston game, first of all, is what impressed me was that Ralston and Taylor picked up the creative mantle from the three midfielders. So I talked about the way that the three midfielders were utilised and the fact they were playing in some ways a more of a defensive, destructive role, really. Therefore, somebody had to be taking on the mantle of ball progression and getting the ball forward. So, for example, both fullbacks completed just over 60 passes, which is double what McGregor and Rogic achieved. And Taylor created 2 chances, which is as many as the whole midfield three did between them. Ralston and Taylor between them had 3 secondary assists each, so 6 between them, and there was only 3 for the whole of the midfield at secondary assists. So they were really building the play. And I think just to pick up on the point James made around the style of play. So I did a similar exercise. I looked at the fullbacks a few weeks ago, and what I used as my benchmark is I used Tierney and Lustig, because I think Lustig is, if I wanted to describe to somebody what does a great defensive fullback look like for Celtic, I would say Lustig. And if I wanted to show somebody what a great offensive fullback looks like, I would probably say Tierney. So they're both benchmarks for a style of fullback, and great therefore to measure the current other fullbacks against. And actually, very interestingly, is that what I realised is that actually Tierney was great at getting the ball up the pitch, but his actually expected assists rate in his career is lower than Ralston and Taylor's. Now, and I think that's something to do with style, right? I think the fullbacks have a more complicated, involved role in the team than perhaps Tierney had. Now, what Tierney's big strength was, which I think many people perhaps undervalue, is that he was an absolutely terrific defender. So you had somebody who was a great threat going forward, but actually defensively he was excellent. And neither Taylor or Ralston are as defensive metrics are as good as Tierney's. Tierney's probably second to Lustig in that sort of hierarchy. And so to think we had them both at the same time, and then you had this sort of Tierney, Lustig, his long ball progression was excellent. Tierney's driving runs were excellent. It was a brilliant combination to have. So what I would say is that there's a little bit of stylistics going on here in that, Ralston and Taylor's creative numbers, I think, are boosted by volume just because of the way they're being used in the team. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're better players than Tierney. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you brought in another player, they could actually do even better. I think that's the thing we have to keep in our minds. And I'm pretty convinced about that, if I'm honest with you. Juranovic's numbers are quite strange. He's actually, I agree with you, Enda. He looks like a proper footballer. His touch, his control, his physical speed, his awareness, his confidence. I mean, he plays with such confidence. He plays with that little bit of swagger that we all like. But his numbers are actually really, you couldn't separate him from the other 2 fullbacks that I mentioned there, Ralston and Taylor. In fact, if anything, he's less creative, as James said. He's probably a little bit better at ball progression, what I call build-up, so pack passing, for example. just general volume and accuracy of passing. He's probably got the edge over them in that regard. But in terms of the sharp end, actual, expected assists, chances created, he's actually worse than Bolingoli in that regard, which is so far, which is I think a surprise. But again, context, right? He's been moved around all over the pitch. He's been playing left back. He's been playing wide on the right. He's not had a settled run of games at that right back position. In fact, I think I said the other day, for the first time, I think in the previous game, he actually completed 90 minutes at right back in 2 games in a row. It's the first time that happened. You cannot underestimate a player getting into the rhythm of playing that in that same position. So I think we have to. I think there's still more to come, I would suggest, from Juranovic.
I would also add that the system probably doesn't allow Juranovic to be as creative as he necessarily could be. Granted, his crossing has been a weak point over the last couple of weeks when he did get the crosses into the box. But if you think about the way he plays a large amount of his game in central midfield, really, like playing as an inverted right back and being so comfortable on the ball. He's often on the ball. But then if you think about getting it out wide and that almost set piece that Celtic have of the pass into Abada from Juranovic, followed by Juranovic over that, followed by Matt O'Reilly swinging around and coming and getting onto the ball and crossing it into the box. It's not necessarily his role to do that, to get it into the box. That may also play into the numbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. As I say, what I concluded when I looked at this was there's a lot going on, and it's not just about ability. It's about how players are, to James's point, how players are being utilised. And as I completely echo the fact that if Postecoglou decided that the best utilisation of the squad for this particular game, knowing how the game was going to pan out, was to have those 2 players playing on the wide positions, I can't argue with how it turned out, because, as I say, they stepped up and they picked up that creative mantle in that game that the midfielders, whilst they were fighting their battles.
Did you look at Juranovic as a left back, James, as well, or no?
Yeah, I did, and kind of to Alan's point. So I broke it out, and it's not within StatsBomb. I can't take it down because, as Alan said, he was playing even intra-game between positions. So I can do that in Y-Scout, but I can't do that in StatsBomb with the permission level that I have. So I put that clearly in the piece. This was not as precise as I would like it to be. But yeah, his time at left back, I mean, he's not even in the same ballpark as Taylor has been on an output basis. So he's not, if you just delineate his left back time, as Alan said, it's a good bit even below Bolingoli when he was. So has not been great there. So yeah, but at right back, again, it's, as I said, this is a credit to Ralston. And again, what Alan's saying as far as the kind of allocation of production. I mean, Ralston was up near Tavernier in his output, and for whatever you want to say about Rangers and Tavernier, he's put out a lot of big numbers, both from an assistant perspective, expected assists, and even non-penalty goal scoring for a fullback. So for Ralston to be in that echelon of production, it is what I wrote back in December. It's unreasonable to expect Juranovic or even Ralston to keep that up, probably, just because of the sheer volume of what the production had been.
Well, fair play to Ralston for doing what he's doing, because I don't think, again, nobody saw this coming. So I'm delighted that.
But if you
happened.
Sorry, Enda, just one other little point on that. James is absolutely right. And Ralston's like 7 years younger than Tavernier. So the other thing is, if you think of it from a Scotland perspective, it's just, if you compare O'Donnell to Ralston, it's just an unfair comparison. They're just miles apart now. I mean, if you're looking at sort of Scotland right backs, then which is a problem position, then Ralston should definitely be in the mix in the form that he's been in.